this podcast, we will be looking at storytellers, stories, and the reasons that oral storytelling is important in our world today. You would think with all the technology we have available that stories do not have a place anymore, but they are needed more than ever. For in storytelling is where we find truth, we find reality, and we find the heart of what it is to be human. Welcome to the heart of storytelling. My name is Alyssa Curtain, and let's go on an adventure. Welcome to this week's episode. This week we speak with US storyteller Marilyn McPhie, who I met during a Zoom on Australian Storytellers. She told a wonderful story from Botswana. In the interview, we talk about Marilyn's background and working with children, but also we explore working with people with dementia, running an organisation for storytelling, and also we shared a love of ancestry and the connections we have to our family and our lineage that can become stories, which was quite a great little conversation. I hope you enjoy this interview with Marilyn. Welcome to this week's episode. This week we're speaking with Marilyn McPhie, who is in San Diego in the United States. Welcome to the podcast, Marilyn.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
I would love to hear about your storytelling journey.
Well, I've been telling stories for a long, long time. It's something that I feel like was sort of in my DNA. One of my grandmothers was a poet and often did poetry readings. And my other grandmother majored in elocution, if you can imagine that back in the day. I don't know that you can major in elocution these days, but she did. And so I always grew up being interested in stories and being interested in books and things. So I majored in English in college, which makes a lot of sense. And then the way that I got into professional storytelling was I have 5 children. And when the oldest 2 were 3 and 4, I decided that I wanted to sign them up for a preschool, kind of a break for me and excitement for them. And so what was near my house and that I could afford was a parent participation preschool. So I went to sign them up and found out that they were very serious about the participation part. When I showed up, they handed me a 3-page paper that was just had a list of all these jobs that you could do, and they said, pick one. And so the first thing on the list was to clean the bathrooms once a week. And I thought, no, I don't want to do that. I do plenty of that at home. And then I kept scanning down the list, and they were things like sand and repaint the playground equipment, sew curtains for one of the playrooms. And I kept looking, I kept thinking, no, I'm looking for a break. And then on the 3rd page, about in the middle, it said, tell stories every week. And I thought, well, that sounds easy enough. I could do that. And I found that I liked it so much that every semester after that, when I signed up one of my children for this preschool, I would always try to get there early so I could sign up for that rather than cleaning the bathrooms. And then after I had done that for a few years, a woman came to me and said, the woman who does the story time at the library is moving, and I thought it might be something you would like. I said, well, yes, I would. And so I started telling stories at the library for preschoolers, and I did that for 30 years. And then things just kind of went from there. People started asking me to come to their schools or come to their organizations. But I have to say that nowadays, at least 80% of the storytelling that I do is for adults. So, yeah.
So did you have a preference for children or adults, or is it something it just doesn't really matter who the audience is?
You know, I say these days that I just really love telling stories for adults. You can tell stories that are a little more complex, and it's always an interesting group. But when I get a chance to tell the preschoolers again, I remember how much I enjoyed that. So I think it just depends. My preference is kind of whatever audience is in front of me tends to be my favorite audience.
That's great. So do you remember the very first story you told?
Oh, no. Gosh, that was a long, long time ago, Alyssa. That was decades ago. I don't remember the first story I told, but I do remember one of the first stories that I liked. I was thinking the other day, when I turned 8, I always had books in the house. We always had books, and I read most everything that came through the door. But a favorite family friend took me out to a fancy restaurant in a fancy department store for lunch. And then she said I could pick up a present. And the present that I picked at the time was a book called Eight Fairy Tales. I still have the book, and it remains a favorite of mine. And so the stories that were in those eight fairy tales and a couple of other books that were really favorites when I was growing up, they remain really dear to me. I mean, even a story like Little Red Riding Hood, I love that story. I still love that story and tell it in a few different variations.
Mm. So did you find in the beginning that you just fell naturally into storytelling, or did you learn a lot in those early days?
Of course, you learn a lot in the early days. I think that it's true for a lot of storytellers is that you feel kind of tied to the text, to the way the story has been told, has been read, or has been told to you. And as you get more and more comfortable with storytelling, you are more inclined to adapt to the time frame, to the audience, to the weather outside, to whatever
Mm.
else is around. So I think you become more comfortable, definitely.
Mm. Yeah. So what are you doing now? What is the bulk of your work that you do?
It really varies a lot. As I said, most of the things that I do these days tend to be for adults. I've done several things recently for groups of senior adults, including a program that I did in a daycare center for adults with mild dementia. And that is really interesting and very, very rewarding. But I also did a program in a private school for sixth graders. And that's a really interesting age. So much fun, so much fun. They will follow you down every rabbit hole and laugh at your jokes. I like that a lot. But I'm the president of our local storytelling group. And so I do a lot of organizing and producing these days too, and which is demanding in a different way than telling stories, but it means if you're in charge of putting something together, it means that you can do the things that please you. So just today I was talking with a woman about uh, a program that we're doing, a storytelling festival, and part of the festival will be a panel on women in the military, and that was fascinating. And so I've been doing some storytelling at an artist hangout, really quirky and beach area. I've been doing some workshops on working on stories, and these days it seems like those workshops mostly are interested in personal stories, people who are preparing stories for all kinds of applications in business and their personal life. So I've been doing a lot of workshops along those lines as well,
Mhm.
and things online, which is a joy. You know, that has something that has come about as a result, basically, of the pandemic.
Mhm.
I know that before the pandemic, if anybody asked me if I had any videos, I would say, well, I've got a couple. Well, now I've got 100 because because it's just been online, and I've made so many friends all over the world who are storytellers. It's been a joy. It's been a real gift. It really has been.
There are lots of secondary benefits of the pandemic. I mean, not the illness and the death and stuff, but the
Right.
social networking and the global community outreach has been fantastic for bringing the
Extraordinary.
community
Yeah.
together. Yeah.
Yeah. Once you
Yeah.
figured out you weren't going to die, a lot of the rest of it was really, really a plus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a couple of things I want to go back to. I'd love to hear about your experience with working with people with dementia. That's something, yeah, it's really fascinating. Like, how do they respond to it? Yeah, how do they respond to stories? And yeah, all that thing. Yeah.
It is really interesting. And at first, before I had done it, it sounded a little bit daunting because I've known people who suffered from dementia, and it's sometimes difficult to carry on a reasonable conversation. But the people that I've been working with in this particular facility, they have mild dementia, and some of them are well, many of them are really, really, really sharp.
Mm.
So it doesn't differ too much from the other audiences that I have. I
Mm.
have found that there are certain topics that work well with most seniors and also with people with dementia. I've been I know that you can't ask necessarily the same questions and expect the same answers, but one of the topics that is of real interest is cooking. So I would tend to show up with an apron, a red and white checked apron, and a copy of the Betty Crocker cookbook that everybody seemed to have back in the 50s and 60s, and telling stories about food, and even just flipping through the cookbook. Everybody's got memories about that, and not everybody responds. Some of the people with dementia aren't, terribly responsive as far as carrying on a conversation, but many of them have much to tell you, much. And it's always on topic. And so I think it's very rewarding. I've also found that bringing in things that go with your stories. So one of the things that I've talked about is cars. Lots of people like to talk about cars and car trouble. And so if I bring in pictures or I bring in a small, I often talk about this 1967 Volkswagen Beetle that we have, we still have, and bring in a small model of that. And so visuals are good. Once I was doing a program about trains, and I brought in a couple of pennies that I had put on the tracks and were flattened, and I passed those around for them to, just touch. So some sort of visual or tactical thing
Mm.
is helpful. But I think even though some people feel a little bit uneasy about telling stories to people with dementia, it's really it's really very rewarding. It is. And in fact, once there was a man who always attended my storytelling things when I was doing them like once a month. And for his birthday, he arranged for his wife to join him for this to hear this my stories. She was not part of the dementia group, but he liked the stories so much that he had her specially invited to come and be a part of that. And I found that really, really so lovely that he would like the stories well enough and feel like that they were something that his wife would like as well.
Mm. So do you tell mostly biographical stories in that experience or a bit of everything?
I find that with that group, I end up telling mostly personal stories or historical stories, so real
Mm.
stories. And sometimes if they are of events that they would know about,
Mm.
like military things that they might have experience with, like I said,
Mm.
food, cars. In fact, my sometimes people say, well, what are the prompts that you can give people for personal stories? I say, well, my two absolute go-to prompts are tell me about a cooking disaster, because most people have one or two of those, or tell me about some car trouble. And I think most people have stories about car trouble. I certainly do. I certainly do.
Mm. That sounds really interesting. I've always wondered if, when working with people with dementia, whether they travel in their memory or things pop up um,
Yeah.
that they'd forgotten or something like that. So I just always wondered if that was helpful for families, to have storytelling in that space.
Yeah, I think it really is. I think it
Mm.
is. And memories do pop up. And if you've worked with people with dementia, they may not be able to tell you what they had for breakfast today, but they might very well be able to tell you what they had for breakfast on their birthday when they were 6,
Mm.
because those memories are bright and
Mm.
accessible, sometimes
Mm.
at least.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. So I'd love to hear about your community, the work that you're doing within your storytelling community.
Well, Storytellers of San Diego has theoretically at least a 40-year history. But for most of that time, we were kind of a loosely organized bunch of people who like stories. And about 15 years ago, my husband kept saying things like, you really should get organized and have a real organization. I said, no, 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 you don't understand. We just tell stories. We don't do that organization stuff. And then after getting a few phone calls and messages from people saying, well, where can I find you online? And, oh, who are you associated with? And, okay, fine, he's right. And so I talked to one of the other storytellers who's a whiz at organizing, and we did organize. And so we've got bylaws, and we've got officers, and we've got a board, and we've got a website, and we've got a YouTube channel. And so there are about a dozen storytellers, and we each have our own individual things, of course, but then we work on these group projects. So we've had a festival every year, which is really fun to organize. And then we do a thing that is called Telebration, a yearly storytelling celebration. Maybe you've heard of that. We perform as a group at a Scottish Highland Games, at a folk festival. And the last few years, we've told stories. We like to look for places that we can do monthly storytelling. And so we've been at a folk club, we've been at a chocolate shop, we've been at a mead and cider hall that's Viking themed. So it's really lovely to do these regular things with a group of people who are tell stories in different ways. They come from different walks of life, and but we enjoy performing together, and everybody sort of works together in arranging the more elaborate programs like our festival. And it's great to have a community of storytellers that you hang out with, both locally and then wider as well. We're associated with the Storytelling Association of California and with the National Storytelling Network here in the United States. And I know that all over the world there are storytelling organizations, and I think there are good reasons for that. I like hanging out with other storytellers for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I heard you tell a story on the Australian Storytellers Zoom. So, you jump into international things regularly, or it's just when you can?
I do. As I think I told you, Australia is a little bit tricky because usually that storytelling group, which is quite lovely and really well organized, but tends to be at around 2 in the morning for me. So I love to go when I can, but sometimes I think, oh no, I'm so not up for that today. I do join in quite regularly with people in the UK. I don't know if you're familiar with Liz Weir, wonderful storyteller from Northern Ireland, and she has a gathering every Saturday that I like to attend if I can. And so I visited her in person as well as a few other storytellers that are in Europe and UK, Ireland. And I love doing that because it gives you a really broader perspective. For instance, I found that one of the types of stories that I like a lot, I tend to love stories that come from the places that my ancestors came from, which is England, Scotland, Ireland, Germany, Denmark. Pretty much that's that's my DNA. But I found that after a long time in attending these things in those countries, what they want to hear from me is not the folk tales that they're familiar with, but they would like to hear stories from California. So stories of Native Americans, stories of cowboys, stories of settlers, some historic stories about rattlesnakes, which they don't have in Ireland. So it's really interesting to think about what stories appeal to different groups. And when you widen your perspective from a local group to who've all encountered rattlesnakes to a more international group, then you tend to look at the stories that you tell in a little different light as well, which is really nice. I enjoy that.
Mm. So have you done any international storytelling? Like, have you gone and told stories in other places, like physically tell them?
I have usually when I travel, which I like to do, I like to connect with other storytellers and do some storytelling. So I have actually told stories in Ireland and in Scotland and in England and in Germany and in Denmark. Yeah, all of those places.
So
And
all
it's
of them.
really been fun. Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, online is, it's a global audience anyway, so which is fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's really nice to be there in person because you realize that different places in the world organize their storytelling in different ways. And I like that. So when we went to Scotland, my husband's family, I'm a little bit Scottish, but he's very Scottish. And we went to the island of Colonsay, where the McPhies come from. And I got to tell stories in the hotel there on Colonsay. And that was really a treat because it had family and storytelling connections for me.
Yeah, I find the same. I'm working on a show at the moment about that. You know, we're not Australians, they want Australian stories. Well, I'm not allowed to tell the Indigenous stories, but I can tell the colonist stories. And so I'm working on a show about an ancestor who came from Scotland to Australia, and like it, and I'm trying to bring those two things together because it's, we're part of the British diaspora, but we don't belong there. And there's this, this land is was owned by other people before the Europeans got here. So, where do we belong, the displaced people that are in the in-between? So it's been a fun adventure to explore that idea.
That makes a lot of sense to me too, because of course that's the story of America as well. And like you, I don't tell stories from indigenous groups, but I do tell stories of colonists and things. And I love family stories, so historical family stories. I loved telling about my ancestors and how they came to America and the trials that they endured and the sacrifices that they made. I love that. So
Mm.
how exciting that you're doing that program.
Yeah, me too. I've been stuck in ancestry, and there's so many great, and I've got 6 convicts in my family as well. So there's, convict stories. Like one was sent out for stealing cheese, another for stealing a sheep. Like there's some rich history there. Um, I How do you go researching your family stories? Like where do you, like ancestry is obviously a really good place to begin, but where do you
It is.
find these things? Yeah.
Well, as a sort of an amateur genealogist and really, really amateur, it's the stories that I'm looking for. A lot of course, genealogists, they're looking for the dates and the names, and they're tracking down the birth certificates and things like that, which is great. That's really important. But I apparently, like you, I'm looking for the stories. So that's a lot. I think it's a lot harder than finding dates and certificates because not everybody has stories that they've written down. And so when I find one, I feel really, really fortunate.
Mhm.
And I try to tell those stories. I tell them to my family, my children and grandchildren, but I also tell them to other people too, because I think that other people can resonate with my family
Mhm.
stories. I
Mhm.
tell a story about when my mother was 6 years old. She was very, very poor. And the thing she wanted the most for Christmas was a store-bought doll.
Mhm.
Well, that resonates with me because the whole story, she didn't get one, not that year anyway. But it tells me about my mother. It tells me about the context of her young life, which was quite different from mine. And I think that it informs people who are not related to my family about what experiences that people had.
Mhm.
So I feel fine about telling those stories. But yes, like you, I don't have too many convicts in my family, but I do have one ancestor who was arrested. He worked he was in England. He was a fork manufacturer. And yeah, things really went south in his life. And one day he showed up at the fork factory and he ended up hitting this woman on the head with a blunt end of a hatchet, which they said didn't really do any damage, didn't break the skin because it said in the newspaper article her hair was very thick. But he said in court that it was just self-defense because she at the time had been throwing forks at him. Now, this is a story. You know, so when you find a story like that, you think, yeah, that's a great story. I got to tell that one.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
not all of my ancestors were heroic. Certainly some of them were. But
Well, yeah, I like when like even though the dates are still factual, but one of the things I find interesting is the dates that people died. And one of the things I find really interesting in my particular family is a lot of the children, their parents died when they were 5 or under. And so they grew up without parents or they grew up with aunts and uncles. And so to grow up in that way must have been a very challenging thing. Someone into an orphanage, like those those stories are just so rich of we just have to fill in the gaps because there's no writing, they might have marked their name with an X or something like that. So yeah, we've got to piece these things together if there's no written record.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I know that a lot of my ancestors came across the United States in covered wagons in the mid 1800s, and there were very few families that ended up intact by the time they got west.
Mm.
Somebody had died along the way, usually several somebodies. And so by the time they got settled again, it was a lot of really blended families.
Mm.
And it, it's really interesting to think about because these days you have children and you expect that they will live
Mm.
and that you will be a family forever. Back then, I don't think that was an expectation at all. Just
No,
not at all.
no. One of the saddest ones that I've found was that a family came out from Ireland and they brought half a dozen children with them and left a couple behind. But within 6 months of arriving, the father died and the mother died not long after. So these children had come to this whole new country and were, in Melbourne in the goldfields, without any any family. So yeah, it's just, mind boggles to think how different it was. And I find that family stories, I think, when we're talking about appropriation and stuff, I think family stories are a place where we can really go, well, actually, this is a story of my lineage, and I can tell this story. And there's a lot of not only identity and belonging in it, but it feels really rich to be able to share these people who have been forgotten.
Yes, I think I agree. I know I read an article once that really stuck with me, and it said that the best kinds of family stories and the kids, especially who know family stories, that
Mm.
the ones who are the happiest with their families,
Mm.
they're not stories of how, oh, we were great, we were the best, we did so well, we succeeded, we won, we got these prizes. No, they said they called it an oscillating family narrative
Mm.
where you had a drought and you had a death and and things went badly and then you recovered. And so then the outcome of stories like that is we had good times, we had bad times as a family, but we survived. We were resilient. We were creative, and we still exist. And so the message to people who are living now is you can do that too.
Mm.
Your life may have its ups and downs, but with determination and with resilience, and you can you can come out on top. You can survive.
Mm. Mm. That's wonderful. Thank you. Just wanted to go back to the YouTube things. Um, do you just sort of have a day of a week that you just jump on and do a story, or how do you manage your YouTube channel?
Yeah, a good portion of the stories that are on my YouTube channel came from pandemic times because I told you our storytelling group did a couple of a couple of events every month in person at this chocolate shop or at the mead hall or something. And when the pandemic shut everything down, we were unwilling to let go of that. And so for those years, we organized the same kinds of programs that we would have organized in person, only we recorded each one. And so those ended up on the YouTube channel. I've been less good at doing regular recordings since we've been back in person.
Mm.
But now we've all got we figured out how to do it. Sometimes better than others, definitely. But when we do programs, very often they'll be recorded and they'll be put up on either the Storytellers of San Diego YouTube channel or my own YouTube channel. And I think it gives people an idea of how you tell what kinds of stories you tell and how you tell them. And I think it's good. I love seeing other people's stories on their YouTube. And so now when people say, well, can I see you telling a story? Yeah, you can. Some it's better. Some of the stories are better than others, but you can definitely see them. You can.
Yeah.
So I like
Yeah,
that.
I think
How about
it's a
you?
good place. I do have a YouTube channel and I've put my performances up there, the ones I've recorded. Including the very first one that I did in public, which is very, very rough recall Rumpelstiltskin. And so from that moment, the reason I put that one up is because this is where I started. This is my beginning, and I want to be able to show myself more than anything else, my progress as a storyteller, which is fantastic.
I think that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
And, I suppose that you could reserve your YouTube channel for things that are perfect, but there'd be a lot fewer stories on your channel if you did. And I think that it's not a bad thing to show people that you are working on things and that some things work better than others.
Yeah.
But of course, one of the things that's really interesting about that became pretty clear is you talk about permissions. What stories can you tell? Your family stories. You can tell that, no problem. But if you're telling a story that is copyrighted, you can get permission to tell the story, but that may or may not include permission to record the story. So there are different layers of things that you have to consider when you're recording stories.
Well, I guess
Definitely.
I usually go in the public domain, whatever's in the public domain, I think is probably
then
okay.
that's fine. That's fine.
Yeah.
But I did a program once that I didn't realize they were going to record. They recorded the whole program, and I told 2 stories in it that were copyrighted, and I had permission to tell them, but I didn't have permission to record them. And so later I thought, what am I going to do about that? But I'd gotten a little bit more familiar with how the YouTube channel worked, and so I went in and snipped those 2 out. Because I thought, fair's fair. I didn't have permission to video those. But it's a thing to consider. There are extra things to consider.
Yeah, that's a really good piece of advice. So this podcast is called The Heart of Storytelling, and you've been storytelling for quite some time. I'd love to hear what you think is at the heart of storytelling.
I think the thing that is at the heart of storytelling is communication, because I'm convinced that stories are the best way that people communicate with each other. I'm a great believer in science, and so I like graphs and charts and maps and statistics, and those are interesting and they're informative, but they don't capture hearts and minds like stories do. Stories really connect us. And I think that's of absolutely incredible importance.
And so what do you think the oral tradition is important today, and what do you think is the future of the oral tradition given our very tech-heavy world?
Oh, I think there will always be a need for stories. And in fact, in the work that I do with workshops and things like that, it's not that hard to convince people in all kinds of situations that being a good storyteller will help them in whatever it is they're doing. My son-in-law is a business professor, and sometimes he talks to me about, is there a story I could use for that? And so he knows that statistics will back you up, but you capture people with stories. And I think that's never going to go away. So you think of all the different things that people do: teaching, entrepreneurship, preaching, politics. Yeah, almost anything that people do around other people can work better if you tell a good story.
I like that. I like that. And particularly when you think about, and I guess when you think about statistics, that's one part of the brain. It's not necessarily the story part of the brain either. So and if you have both of those things, well, then you've captured the whole brain in this experience, which is wonderful.
Yeah. When was the last time a chart made you tear up? Not so often. Not so often.
So I imagine you've got lots of wonderful memories of telling stories to people. Have you got any that you'd really love to share?
Oh, that's a really good question. Well, sometimes I say, just because of the 30 years that I did the preschool storytelling at my library, which was really a sweet, sweet experience for me. I said, yeah, if you're a storyteller, you can be famous at the grocery store. But I love that. And still now, actually, that happens sometimes. I was doing a storytelling thing for some older adults, and this woman came up to me after my presentation and she said, I saw your name and I came to this specifically because I remember all those years of bringing my children to your preschool stories at the library. And I just felt so happy about that. I thought this storytelling experience is something that sticks with people, and that, you can be famous at the grocery store, but that people will remember the stories that you tell. And I love
Mm.
it when that becomes apparent.
Why do you think that is?
That people remember.
Mm.
Um, I think there's certain stories that people remember because they resonate with something, an idea they've had, or an experience they've had, or some
Mm.
family history they've had, and so you can think about that. But there are other stories that are folk tales or fairy tales. I told you I love Little Red Riding Hood, and I loved it when I was a little girl, and I still love it because I think that even stories that are not based in true historic fact, that they can inform your life in interesting ways. So I
Mm.
find myself looking at the story of Little Red Riding Hood and looking at, well, what did her mother think about that? And what was the grandmother in all of that? And should we be sympathetic to the wolf? And these days with environmental things, you think, well, maybe we should have more sympathy for the wolf. And and so you can apply stories, whether they are fictional or fact-based, in a lot of different situations in your own life. I think that's
Mm.
why they stick, because it can cycle back and you have a new experience or you're in a new situation,
Mm.
and it's a new opportunity to apply the stories that you know to that situation.
A wonderful answer. Thank you. So you've been really amazing, Marilyn, and I really appreciate your time today. Where can people find you if they want to find out about you and the work that you do?
They can find me at my website, which is marilynmcphie.com. And you can find me on my YouTube channel if you just search for my name. You can also find me on the Storytellers of San Diego YouTube channel. So,
Yeah.
yep, I'm not that hard to find. And because my name is not terribly common, if you search for Marilyn McPhie, well, you might get a dog trainer in England, but you'll probably get me. I think I'm probably better connected than she is.
Amazing. And just to finish off, have you got any advice for anyone who would like to do storytelling or work with any of the things that we've discussed today?
Oh, jump in. Absolutely jump in. Take a chance and tell a story at your next opportunity. And there are so many opportunities to tell stories, right? It doesn't have to be a 20-minute story. In fact, it's probably better if it's more like two. But yeah, and pay attention to things that are around you, things that you hear, things that you read. There's stories everywhere that are really appropriate and wonderful to share with people.
Thank you so much for your time today, Marilyn. I really, really appreciate it.
Oh, thanks for the conversation. I enjoyed it.
If you've enjoyed the podcast and would like to support me to continue the work that I'm doing, please head to buymeacoffee.com/Alyssa Curtain and make a donation or sign up for a subscription. This is a passion project, and as such, it is voluntary. So your donations make it easier for me to continue this work. Thank you for your support. Well, that's our episode for today. I hope you've enjoyed learning about storytelling and folktale, fairytale, myth, legend, or personal tales, wonder tales, all sorts of stories, and the art of storytelling and why we really need to continue using it today. You can find more information about me at alyssacurtain.com or at Alyssa Curtain Stories on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. I hope that you can find your heart in storytelling.